There are some questions in the universe that seem unable to be answered. How did the dinosaurs really go extinct? Does getting sucked into a black hole really turn you into spaghetti? Will Hollywood ever stop making more Shrek and Toy Story movies? Thanks to the vast knowledge and power of the internet though, some questions that previously seemed to forever be a mystery can now easily be answered. And not just the boring history and science-related questions like how the dinosaurs died, but the age-old, soul-searching questions that appeal to everyone, like are you an introvert or an extrovert? Or which Arby's combo meal are you? Online quizzes have been around since the early days of the internet and have served a vital purpose in pop culture as being the question answerers, the problem solvers, and the entertainers of the internet for those in need. From questionnaires that offer advice on love and friendship to quizzes that will help solve your identity crises, internet quizzes are often very proudly advertised as shortcuts to the typical self-help book or therapy session. But as with any shortcut, or anything you see on the internet really, it's best to enter these hyperlinks with a grain of salt. And no, by saying that I don't mean to take a different internet quiz about your salt use. While these quizzes and their intended uses may seem ridiculous and arbitrary, they actually originate from a time when these kinds of questionnaires were seen as more helpful and accurate than not. To fully understand internet quizzes, we have to first take a look at what they evolved from: magazine quizzes, or more specifically, women's magazine quizzes. The first quiz to appear in a women's magazine was in 1953, printed in the magazine The Girlfriend. It was largely based around love and relationships, and so this early quiz was titled, "What are you best fitted for, love or a career?" And as you can guess from the title, the quiz asked its readers questions that pertain to both love and life, trying to gauge if its audience was more diligent 50s housewife material, or if they'd be better suited to swear off men altogether and focus on the grind set. While this kind of quiz, especially one that's extra limited with only basic yes or no answers, seems pretty silly in retrospect, this format isn't exactly that far off from the other magazine quizzes that would follow it. It appealed to that feminine market by mentioning boys and romance, and also offered to help solve a career versus marriage identity crisis that was likely pretty common among its young readers. Advice columns in newspapers had been around since the late 1800s, which also attempted to help solve common problems women would typically face surrounding life and love. But the first quiz in The Girlfriend approached the same aspect of giving advice, but in a new DIY sort of way. While it's unfortunate that other quizzes that began cropping up during the 50s, inspired by The Girlfriend's initial quiz, were also mostly about how to be a good wife or questioning if you knew enough about men or love, these still jump-started the culture of quizzes that would continue to take off down the road. Over the years, instead of having readers question what kind of wife they were, magazines in the 70s and 80s went on to ask more cultural and social-based questions, like how trendy are you, or what's your sewing style, which still leaned into the DIY self-help aspect, but strayed more from boys and romance and touched on more stereotypically feminine interests like fashion and hobbies. And by the 90s, magazines like Cosmopolitan were at the top of their game, including articles and advice on female-centric ideals, but also, of course, plenty of quizzes to complement the reading material. Despite some of the quiz themes seeming a little silly or unimportant, they were still popular among most magazines' main consumers. Asking a reader how passionate they are or if they're afraid of commitment presents a situation that only the quiz, or rather the magazine writers, can seem to solve. If a reader is asked a question they don't know the answer to, especially with a readily available avenue to get the question answered themselves, then they're gonna take the quiz. If a reader is already confident in knowing how passionate they are and that they aren't afraid of commitment, they'll still very likely want to see why Cosmopolitan or any other magazine thinks that they know better, or at the very least just see what result they get anyway. Quizzes simply target a very human desire, the need for information and to be in the know. By including insecurities, social aspects, or popular culture in the mix, magazine quizzes created the perfect formula for engaging and retaining an audience. When I was a kid, I was definitely too young for Cosmo and would very intentionally avert my eyes whenever it was on the racks at the grocery store checkouts because it made me feel like I was doing something bad just by looking at it. Instead, I read tween and teen targeted magazines like J14 and Bop. I wasn't very interested in reading the boring articles and mostly used these magazines to cut out every picture of a Jonas Brother I saw and tape them onto my wall, and, of course, also take the quizzes inside. These teenage magazines are where quizzes really started to get into more abstract ideas, or at the very least, less practical ones. I say that because while back in the 50s, teenagers might have had the real worry of if they should marry or stay in a career. But I feel like by the 2000s, there were less people that were actively worrying about how Zach-struck they were. Especially because if you were anything like me as a kid, you did not need a magazine to be able to figure it out. This turn of the century is where magazines and the internet started to overlap. Before the internet, magazines aimed towards a certain demographic were generally accepted to be the best, most appropriately suited media that a demographic could find. But once chat rooms, public forums, and general information became available to anyone with a dial-up connection, magazines and the quizzes within them slowly started to become less regarded as the one and only place to get the answer to which hair color suited someone best. Especially when websites began to crop up that gave anyone the power to create a magazine-like quiz of their own. Quizilla was one of the earliest online quizmaker sites, being introduced in 2002. And though it interestingly eventually turned into a sort of choose-your-own-adventure fanfiction haven, it still had its place in beginning the trend of online quiz websites. And with the rise of other sites like The Spark, All the Tests, and even Facebook, online quizzes eventually became a phenomenon of their own, becoming almost entirely separated from the magazine quizzes that they had evolved from. Instead of only solving problems or answering common questions, quizzes were now by anyone, for anyone, and about anything. With a more relaxed overall style and with more widely appealing topics, it was becoming clear that quizzes were no longer just for girls with marriage problems or tweens with Zac Efron obsessions, but were for anyone who was looking for entertainment or looking to do almost everyone's favorite thing, talk about themselves. Relationship and fashion advice was a lot lower down on the list of popular quiz topics, with Quizilla and similar sites instead having more niche and personalized quizzes like How Did You Die? Anime pics. Random, wahahaha, swimsuit, girls only, 18 beautiful results. And who is You Are Perfect Guy, girls only, with beautiful anime pics. While not everyone was necessarily interested in what swimsuit they would anamorph into, that's the only reasonable explanation I will accept of what this quiz is about. These quizzes mainly differed from the magazine quizzes of old because of their topic choices, offering more loose and fun ideas and a sense of community. I didn't really use many quiz websites myself, but I did play a few games on DisneyChannel.com that were the kid-friendly version of online quizzes based around Disney Channel shows. I specifically remember playing these Sweet Life of Zack and Cody based quizzes over and over again, just for the fun of picking all the choices. Shout out to all the London's Sweet Styler kids who also attempted to make the results they got their entire personality. I also liked to occasionally try my hand at the Impossible quiz every now and then, which may technically count as a quiz, but that I still have a deep underlying hatred for. If you too were victimized by the Impossible Quiz Flash game, you may be entitled to financial compensation. As far as quiz sites go though, I did eventually end up spending more time on yet another quiz hosting page later on into my teen years, and it was a little website called BuzzFeed. While BuzzFeed had been creating and posting quizzes for a while leading up to their spike of popularity, it wasn't until 2014 that the real buzz around BuzzFeed started taking off. BuzzFeed was being marketed as the place for pop culture, especially surrounding media like movies and TV shows. Around the time that BuzzFeed started reaching its peak, fandom culture, especially that on the social media blog site Tumblr, was also starting to take off on the internet. And boy, did BuzzFeed really hone in on the Tumblr user demographic, creating not just popular YouTube videos and listicles, a list article hybrid that literally just lists things, but also quizzes that targeted the specific nature of fandom lovers. Quizzes made to answer the question of what Disney princess you were or which Harry Potter character was going to kill you did already exist on sites like Quizilla in earlier years, but BuzzFeed approached these widely popular and especially fangirl-heavy ideas with their own specially curated BuzzFeed style. With reaction GIFs, internet slang acronyms, and a casual, usually silly narration style that gave the site a more intimate, personal feel, while still having an organized and professional website to host it all on, BuzzFeed was a haven for the chronically online that had a lot of feels about their favorite franchises and media. And with quizzes offering everything from medical advice to relatability on weirdly specific experiences that totally didn't happen to me in second grade, I had friends, okay? Even those who weren't big into Tumblr could still find something that appealed to them. BuzzFeed didn't only have employee-written quizzes though, but also had a dedicated community section that was full of user-made quizzes too. Although BuzzFeed was arguably mainly targeted towards the Tumblr demographic around 2014, once it gained traction, there pretty quickly came a point where there wasn't a person on the internet who hadn't heard of BuzzFeed. And while Disney princess quizzes and random "what bean are you" questionnaires were originally the BuzzFeed bread and butter of the site, the general public that eventually took over the community section made some quizzes that were wild, to say the least. BuzzFeed did have a disclaimer on most community-made quizzes saying that BuzzFeed wasn't associated with them and didn't endorse it, blah blah blah, but I feel like that doesn't fully excuse the inappropriate, shall we say, nature of some of these entries. Just as quickly as it had become somewhat beloved among Disney adults, nostalgic millennials, and Tumblr users fangirling over Benedict Cumberbatch, BuzzFeed was thrown into the pile of things we have all collectively decided we hate by a lot of bandwagon internet users. And with this mentality mixed with a still growing need for fresh, relatable quizzes, BuzzFeed eventually started to scramble for quiz ideas, and people started to notice. The quizzes started to become a lot more niche, no longer focusing as much on pop culture like hot celebrities and TV shows, or simple personality quizzes based on things like zodiac signs, and instead finding out if you like cats or dogs more, but based on what foods you would eat for brunch. I got dogs, by the way. Quizzes based on personality traits and preferences were still popular, but these new BuzzFeed quizzes were clearly starting to blur the line between quirky randomness and just straight up nonsense for filler between ideas. Given how some people felt about BuzzFeed overall and its huge place in pop culture, there were even a few strange meta, self-aware quizzes thrown into the mix, sometimes even written by official BuzzFeed staff. And these self-aware posts were just the beginning of the inevitable, a somewhat sudden decline of BuzzFeed altogether. Ex-employees began posting videos with the title "Why I Left BuzzFeed," with even some of the most popular creators ending up leaving the company by 2018. Since then, BuzzFeed has continued to lay off employees and shut down different areas of the business, making it a shell of its former glory. Despite the decline of BuzzFeed, there's still the top result on Google when searching quizzes, and the second result when only searching the word quiz. There are still plenty of quizzes actively being created on the site, but the company overall isn't quite the powerhouse that it once was. Maybe because one too many edgy teens tipped the quiz scales out of BuzzFeed's favor, flooding the site with strange and unfortunate posts. Maybe it was the official staff that did it, asking one too many readers to make a bowl of mac and cheese to figure out how tall they were. No matter who is to blame for BuzzFeed's downfall, it seems that they've come to terms with it, and are already actively implementing a solution that could solve their quiz-based problems. Only a couple of weeks ago, BuzzFeed unveiled its newest quizzes that respond to chosen answers and develop a result using artificial intelligence. These quizzes have open-ended free-form questions that are typed by the reader instead of the typical multiple-choice question format. This is apparently supposed to create more personalized results and have more outcomes available than typical quizzes, potentially even infinite results if everything works out right. While this all seems like a fun, harmless development, the main goal for BuzzFeed here isn't just to make more engaging and entertaining quizzes. Since they are still a media company with employees and a business, BuzzFeed is of course looking to garner more of an audience, but also looking to boost revenue through ads and paid subscriptions more than anything. And while we're on the topic of BuzzFeed's new marketing ploy, it seems like a good time to mention that all quizzes, even the obscure user-made ones across various websites, were also created around the intention of revenue and marketing. Magazine quizzes were an easy, low-effort way to invite readers in directly from the cover, and to engage them to continue reading other articles after taking the quiz. Early internet quizzes were sometimes created by hired psychologists in order to garner information and interest around the host site. And quizzes posted to larger websites like BuzzFeed and Facebook were directly marketed to social media users, encouraging clicks and longer time spent on websites that were full of advertisements. And if you've ever needed to enter your email to see your quiz results, this is a pretty blatant way for companies to rope you into email advertisements and further market to you. To be honest, despite how annoying persistent marketing can be sometimes, none of this is overly bad when only relating it back to the business. Businesses do need money to run, and appealing to internet users through quizzes certainly isn't the worst way to try and attract an audience. But sometimes it goes beyond just targeted ads and news subscriptions. Sometimes the whole reason businesses and quiz makers want you to take a quiz is to take notes on your answers. Data mining is the process of uncovering patterns and other valuable information from large data sets. In other words, acquiring data that could be useful in some way without explicitly asking for it or being transparent about its purposes. And online quizzes, as you might have guessed, are some of the easiest ways for data miners to collect information from the thousands and millions of people that take them. While BuzzFeed quizzes are a bit more exempt from this rule, considering not quite as many companies are interested in how you like your bacon or who your British soulmate is, even without inputting much personal info, an online quiz or survey site like BuzzFeed can still identify the type of computer you're on, your location through your IP, and the websites you use before and after the quiz site, at the very least. And other information that can be gathered directly from the quiz answers ranges from your consumer habits to identifying information like age or education level. Consumer habits and identity info is mainly used to further identify quiz takers and group them into certain demographics, making it easier to market to them with relevant ads. Worse than that, though, are the quizzes that ask directly personal questions in an attempt to not just collect information on identity and shopping habits, but to phish or directly scam sensitive info out of unknowing quiz takers. These quizzes were especially popular on Facebook, where common quizzes about which Disney princess you were would also end up requesting info about the name of the street you grew up on, your pet's first name, or the city you were born in. These questions and others like them not only have nothing to do with how to be labeled as more of an Ariel than a Cinderella, but are also common security questions or personal info used in passwords. By willingly filling in these seemingly fun quiz questions, quiz takers are offering up personal information for potentially easy access to social media profiles, bank accounts, or identity theft, among other things. Fortunately, I'd like to think that at least the majority of internet users in general are mostly aware of phishing and scammers altogether, which helps diminish the effectiveness of these invasive quizzes. But older people, especially older Facebook users, are usually the targets for these kind of attacks, because they sometimes just don't know any better. And now with AI-infused quizzes that have more open-ended, free response questions, it seems like it's going to get even more difficult to determine if a quiz really is just all fun and games or not, even when they're not actively asking for your favorite color or mother's maiden name. With the way that our phones and the internet and basically everything everywhere already pretty blatantly tracks and records us, having a few quizzes that do the same thing in a more wraparound, more or less voluntary way, I guess doesn't seem that bad in comparison. And none of this was to bash quiz takers or creators. I just think it's worth mentioning to hopefully keep everyone cautious and on the safe side the next time a website asks what Magic School Bus character you are based on your zodiac sign. I've since strayed from my BuzzFeed quiz-taking days as a teen, and I'm kind of glad to not be a teenager taking quizzes during the rise of AI. I may or may not have gotten distracted by taking some BuzzFeed quizzes while making this video, but if that happened, it was strictly for research. Like research about how, if I did happen to build a cake to be told my own age and location. That says a lot about the pure clickability of these quizzes and the questions they pose that are the perfect formula to reach their intended audiences. To offer some unsolicited advice to the younger generation who might also end up baking a cake on BuzzFeed, only now complete with AI that will somehow tell you why all your friends secretly hate you or something. Don't take quiz results too seriously, no matter what they claim to know about you. With alleged infinite quiz answers possible through AI, there's a potential for the results to seem a little too real and personal. But at the end of the day, the internet is full of weird stuff and is essentially a robot that just claims to know you. Take it all with a grain of salt, and don't make the same mistake I did when I was 10 and got so scared by a chain email that claimed a girl was going to crawl out of a storm drain in the middle of the night and come get me that I couldn't sleep all night. Yeah, just be smarter than that. A huge thank you to Kayla Gary, Dylan Webb, Kevin Evans, Emwe, Paper Sam, Sarah, The Goomba Mattress, Unan Olmandor, and the rest of my patrons for supporting me. Take this quiz I made to find out which Patreon tier you are.